interconnect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to ASEAN in Focus. And today, joining me is from our EBC Thailand Bureau. Hello, Crystal.
Hi, Alma. I'm Crystal Mapa from EBC Thailand Bureau, giving you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines. Former Malaysian Premier Mahathir Mohamad tweeted that Muslims had a right to kill millions of French people after a deadly attack in Nice, sparking widespread anger and prompting Twitter to delete his post.
21 people have been killed and dozens more were feared dead on Thursday after a typhoon tore through central Vietnam, triggering landslides and causing some of the worst destruction seen in years.
Malacanang said President Duterte has approved the conduct of an investigation into allegations that former Philippine ambassador to Brazil, Marichu Mauro, physically abused her Filipina household staff.
Tech-savvy Singapore becomes the world's first country to use facial verification in its national ID scheme.
First, former Malaysian Premier Mahathir Mohamad tweeted on Thursday that Muslims had a right to kill millions of French people after a deadly attack in Nice, sparking widespread anger and prompting Twitter to delete his post. 3 people were killed at a church in the southern French city, with the attacker slitting the throat of at least one in what authorities were treating as the latest jihadist assault to rock the country. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Mahathir, the Prime Minister of Muslim-majority Malaysia, until his government collapsed in February, launched an extraordinary outburst in a series of tweets. Twitter initially declined to remove the comments, but finally did so following a furious reaction from the French government. Cedric O, the French Junior Minister for Digital Affairs, said in a tweet in French and English, "I just spoke with the MD or Managing Director of @Twitter France. The account of @Shed official must be immediately suspended. If not, @Twitter would be an accomplice to a formal call for murder." Twitter initially flagged Mahathir's tweet about killing millions of French people as glorifying violence, but did not remove it. However, shortly afterwards, the tweet was deleted entirely, and Twitter told AFP it was because the comments violated policy regarding glorification of violence. Mahathir never made a direct reference to the attack in Nice, however, referring to the beheading of a French teacher who had shown pupils cartoons of the Islam prophet Muhammad. Mahathir said he did not approve of this murder, but that freedom of expression doesn't include insulting other people. Irrespective of the religion professed, angry people killed, said the outspoken 95-year-old who has in the past drawn controversy for remarks asking the Jews community. The French, in the course of their history, has killed millions of people. Many were Muslims. Muslims have a right to be angry and to kill millions of French people for the massacres of the past, he said. But he added that by and large, the Muslims have not applied the eye for an eye law. Muslims don't, the French shouldn't. Mahathir, who served as Malaysian Premier twice for a total of 24 years, also said French President Emmanuel Macron was not showing that he is civilized and added that he was very primitive. The French should teach their people to respect other people's feelings, since you have blamed all Muslims and the Muslims' religion for what was done by one angry person. The Muslims have a right to punish the French. His comments sparked widespread condemnation, with some social media users labeling them outrageous and disgraceful.
"21 people have been killed and dozens more were feared dead on Thursday after a typhoon tore through central Vietnam, triggering landslides and causing some of the worst destruction seen in years. Typhoon Molave hit villages as it made landfall a day earlier, tearing roofs from homes and bringing heavy rain to an area already badly affected by weeks of flooding. Hundreds of rescuers were desperately trying to by thick mud and fallen trees. Authorities relocated around 375,000 people to safety, canceled hundreds of flights, and closed schools and beaches. It made landfall south of Da Nang, packing winds of up to 145 kilometers per hour or 85 miles per hour, before weakening to a tropical depression on Thursday. Nearly 90,000 homes had their roofs blown off, and many were destroyed in the storm, according to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. More than 700 communities were without power, while infrastructure, crops, and safe drinking water supplies had been damaged or destroyed, the Red Cross added. Hoang Phong Thao, Executive Director of ActionAid Vietnam, said the typhoon had brought more death and destruction to communities already torn apart by the worst flooding we've seen in decades.
President Duterte has approved the conduct of an investigation into allegations that former Philippine ambassador to Brazil, Marichu Mauro, physically abused her Filipina household staff, according to Malacanang. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque made this confirmation after Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said the agency would need to get approval from the president before it can initiate an investigation against the envoy.
Well, gaya ng sinabi ko po, inaprubahan na po ang pag-iimbestiga labang kay yung ating dating ambahador sa Brazil, no? Na-recall na po kasi siya, kaya po ang sabi ko baka former ambassador na siya, no, si Mauro. Pero yan po ang balita at pinaubayan na po namin sa DFA ang investigasyon dahil ang pwede namang ipataw na parusa ay hindi lang administrative, pwede rin mag-recommend ng criminal charges kung kinakailangan ang DFA. Well, yung mabilisan pong pag-authorize na DFA na imbestigahan si Ambassador Mauro, indicative na kinakailangan bigyan ng katarungan yung naging biktima ng karahasan ng kasambahay na kababayan natin.
On Monday, Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin said former Philippine ambassador to Brazil, Marichu Mauro, has been recalled effective immediately to explain the maltreatment of her service staff. He also said a severe response awaits the Philippine envoy over her aide's abuse. Locsin said, quote, the agency's response on this matter will be severe to the fullest extent of the law, especially when it involves a high-ranking DFA official, setting an example to ensure that matters like these will never be tolerated, unquote. He also said the DFA will never tolerate actions done by ranking officials or staff that go against the promotion and protection of the welfare of overseas Filipinos.
Also this week, President Duterte announced that Metro Manila will remain under General Community Quarantine or GCQ status until November 30, along with other areas. Let's listen in.
Ang proposed quarantine qualification for November 1 to 30 herewith is the proposed community quarantine classification subject to appeals from the LGUs. General Community Quarantine or GCQ from November 1 to 30. NCR, gusto man talaga nila, Batangas, Iloilo City, Bacolod City, Tacloban City, Iligan City, Lanao del Sur. Ang gusto ng mga may karamihan, gusto nila make it permanent because they have seen the goodness of the result. Na it has considerably lowered the number of people who are infected with the microbe. So gusto nila ito, palagay ko naman sa inyo marin itong kapakanan. Look, we are not here to make your life miserable or sad. We are here to make your life comfortable and to make you happy. Wala kaming ibang dito. Bakit kami maglalagay na ito, mga ganitong papel kung what's the point of sige kayo daldal dyan? So what's the point of working on these figures if it does not do anything good? Pero
Aside from Metro Manila, Batangas, Iloilo City, Bacolod City, Tacloban City, Iligan City, and the province of Lanao del Sur will also remain under GCQ status. Last week, Metro Manila mayors recommended retaining GCQ status for the rest of the year. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque earlier said their proposal is subject to the approval of the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, or IATF-EAD. He also admitted that the IATF is hesitant about further relaxing quarantine restrictions as it may result in a possible spike in coronavirus cases.
And staying in the Philippines, Manila Mayor Francisco Isko Moreno Dumagoso said that the city of Manila will install radio frequency identification for city residents this weekend as the government bats for a 100% cashless tollway payment. Dumagoso said the activity has been scheduled on Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Kartilya ng Katipunan beside the Manila City Hall. He also said he has received numerous requests from Manila residents asking for help in easing traffic congestion in different toll gates where RFID mass registrations are being done. With the RFID installation in the city government hopes to reduce traffic jams in the different toll gates and shorten the waiting time of passengers. He also clarified that the RFID installation would only cater to those who have Class 1 vehicles or cars, SUVs, and passenger vans such as UV Express. Trucks and other large vehicles are not included.
Singapore will allow visitors from mainland China and an Australian state hard hit by COVID-19 from next month in a further easing of pandemic borders restrictions, authorities said Thursday. Visitors will be required to take a virus test upon arriving in Singapore and will not need to quarantine if they record a negative result when the new rules take effect on November 6. Both mainland China and Victoria State in Australia have comprehensive public health surveillance systems and displayed successful control over the spread of COVID-19 virus. A press release from the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore said, "The risk of importation from these places is low." Singapore had earlier lifted restrictions for visitors from other parts of Australia, Brunei, New Zealand, and Vietnam. None of the 602 arrivals so far from those destinations had tested positive for the coronavirus after arriving in Singapore, CAAS added. Singapore closed its borders in March to tourists and short-term visitors and later implemented a partial lockdown as coronavirus outbreaks swept through dormitories housing hundreds of thousands of migrant workers. The city-state has recorded nearly 58,000 COVID-19 cases, but only 28 deaths, and is gradually reopening its borders as it seeks to revive an economy battered by the pandemic. It has already announced quarantine-free Green Lane arrangements for essential business and official travel with several countries, including Japan, Malaysia, South Korea, and Indonesia. Singapore also announced a travel bubble with Hong Kong earlier this month, though a start date has not yet been announced.
Meanwhile, tech-savvy Singapore will become the world's first country to use facial verification in its national ID scheme. The system, which can be used on an app on mobile devices or at special kiosks, captures a series of photos of the individual's face in various lights and then matches them with data from government-issued IDs to verify the user's identity. Let's take a look.
Pin. Okay, and then put my face. That We want to have assurance that the person behind the device is a real person. It's a person who claimed who he is. And there's not a image or a video.
It is different from face recognition, which is used, for example, in surveillance. All right. So the big difference between these two is that face verification is an intentional process. It requires the users to present themselves, okay, to provide consent.
Even though there are perhaps fewer concerns with the use of it for authentication, the technology is still far from benign. There's still concerns through the use of our faces to access key services. Biometric technology is kind of an intrusive technology which we know has certain sets of biases, which we know can have issues identifying people of color, can have issues with women, trans people, all these groups. We have to be very cautious about whether consent is genuinely, informed and freely given in these kind of contexts, particularly with the power imbalance between yourself and the government, but also between people and the institutions like the banks and others using this kind of technology.
I think currently the government does use biometrics in many areas. For example, like at ICA, the borders. So I think they already have the data, and so far there's been no breach or whatsoever, so I'm fine with it.
From next year, millions of people living in the city-state will be able to access government agencies, banking services, and other amenities with a quick face scan. This biometric check will do away with the need to remember a password or security dongle when performing many everyday tasks, according to its creators. It is part of the financial hub's drive to harness technology, from ramping up the use of electronic payments to research on driverless transport. Facial verification has already been adopted in various forms around the world, with Apple and Google implementing the technology for tasks like unlocking phones and making payments. Governments have also deployed it at airports for security checks on travelers, but Singapore's rollout is one of the most ambitious yet, and the first to attach facial verification to a national identification database. The technology captures a series of photos of a person's face in various lights. These images are matched with other data already available to the government, such as national ID cards, passports, and employment passes. Kwok of GovTech insisted that no data would be shared with the third parties, and users would be left with other options, such as personal passwords to access services.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced, eagle news, because we live in interesting times.
Hello there. Imagine Dami got the virus, and she infected 2 more. And those 2 infected a lot more of people. And it goes on and on until it became an epidemic. But what if Demi stayed at home? Then those two wouldn't have contracted the virus. Then those people would have not been infected. This is not just your battle, it's everyone's, and you can be a huge help. Follow social distancing, or better yet, stay at home.
Welcome back to ASEAN in Focus. U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo warns over unlawful claims made by the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea during a meeting with Indonesia's Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi. The two sides also reaffirmed cooperation, including in the defense sector.
We discussed the situation in the South China Sea. For Indonesia, South China Sea should be maintained as a stable and peaceful sea. International law, in particular UNCLOS 1982, must be respected and implemented. Therefore, any claims should be based on universally recognized principles of international law, including UNCLOS 1982.
We are vibrant, diverse democracies, and we honor religious freedom. We respect freedom of the seas, sovereignty, and the rule of law. These are shared visions for the world. Today, Foreign Minister Retno and I affirm the importance of keeping our shared values at the heart of our relationship and at the heart of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Security, our law-abiding nations reject the unlawful claims made by the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea, as is clear from Indonesia's courageous leadership on the subject within ASEAN and at the United Nations. It's a cause worth pursuing in multilateral settings, and the Trump administration very much supports this. I also welcome the example Indonesia has set with decisive action to safeguard its maritime sovereignty around the Natuna Islands.
Pompeo arrived in Indonesia from the Maldives, where he announced the United States would, for the first time, open an embassy in the Indian Ocean archipelago, a move that reflects growing U.S. concern about increasing Chinese influence in the region. Pompeo has championed a hard line on China on issues ranging from trade to security to the COVID-19 pandemic. In July, the United States branded Beijing's vast claims in the dispute-rife South China Sea to be illegal.
The Philippines would concede nothing when it comes to territorial claims in the South China Sea. That is according to Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. He said that the Philippines had lodged a multitude of diplomatic protests against every incursion that China has made. Let's listen in.
But when it comes to objecting to every incursion that, as we see it, that China has made, we have fired diplomatic protests. When I was in the UN, I used to say firing diplomatic protests is like throwing paper at a brick wall. But I was told, no, don't be like that. It has a significance in international law. Once you let one infraction pass, then it establishes a bad precedent, which gives the world an excuse to yield you to the stronger and richer powers. So don't give them an excuse. And that's why we have started to build up our, not exactly our blue water navy, but we have enough corvettes. We are swarming our areas because that's the Chinese strategy, to swarm the areas also with their fishing boats. And my strategy, together with some of my colleagues in Southeast Asia, is you swarm with our vessels all over the place, and the likelihood of an accident happening, a collision, an allision, or whatever, increases tremendously. And in our case, you hit one of our military vessels. And that, I believe, is a trigger for the Mutual Defense Treaty. And sometimes I've got on the record to say, sink one of ours, that violates the Mutual Defense Treaty, and I guess that's World War III. This has also alarmed the Americans for my saying that, but that is what the Mutual Defense Treaty says. And I'm so happy to have Mike Pompeo there as Secretary of State because he says the same thing. So that's how we're doing it now. No concessions. We allow no infraction to go unanswered. And then we just try to see if we can also cooperate on other fields, such as the fact that China is the rising economy in the world.
Secretary Locsin said Manila is resolved to protect every inch of its sovereignty and sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea under international law, and as clarified and affirmed by the 2016 Arbitral Award. At the UN, President Duterte himself underscored that the landmark ruling, which invalidated China's massive 9-dash claims in the South China Sea, is now part of international law beyond compromise.
A prominent Thai anti-establishment figure was on Thursday charged for his role in an illegal flash mob protest last year, prosecutors in the country's capital said. Thanathorn Juangrunruangkit, a charismatic billionaire and founder of the dissolved Future Forward Party, is accused of 5 public assembly violations linked to the rally in Bangkok's Central Shopping District in December 2019. Charges include failing to notify police of a public gathering, blocking a SkyTrain station, using a megaphone without permission, and holding a rally close to a royal residence, his lawyer Crisadang Nutchartut said. And I quote, "The maximum sentence is 6 months in jail," he told reporters. Charges Thursday are part of a slew of recent legal actions against Thanathorn and other Thai MPs elected under the Future Forward banner, but who have now shifted to its successor Move Forward Party. Thai police on Thursday also announced they would summon 6 demonstrators for questioning over Monday's protest at the German embassy in Bangkok. King Mahavajiralongkorn spends long periods in Germany and has been accused of conducting state business from abroad.
In a related story, orange-vested drivers of motorbike taxis have become allies to Thailand's pro-democracy protesters gathering across traffic-snarled Bangkok and offering lifts and keeping an eye out for trouble. Bangkok's motorbike taxi drivers ferried stranded protesters to newly announced demonstration sites, helping to thwart the government's week-long emergency decree banning gatherings of more than 4 people. Take a look.
มีส่วนลดพิเศษจากปกติเราคิด20-30อย่างเงี้ยก็จะคิดแค่ถูกลงมาจาก40แล้วคิด30อย่างเงี้ยให้ถูกลงมาก็ช่วยเหลือผู้ชุมนุมด้วยเราก็มีรายได้เพิ่มด้วย
In Malaysia now, Malaysia's King Sunday rejected a proposal by the Premier to declare a state of emergency and suspend Parliament to fight the coronavirus after the plan sparked a massive backlash. Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin sought the drastic measures following a recent spike in virus cases, but critics claimed he was mainly concerned with crushing mounting challenges to his leadership. Muhyiddin seized power without a vote in March after a reformist government collapsed, but his administration is unstable, with only a wafer-thin majority in parliament. His government argued emergency powers would bring stability to fight COVID-19 amid speculation they will lose a looming vote on the budget, which could prompt snap polls some fear could worsen the outbreak. Under the constitution, the King Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmad Shah has the power to declare a state of emergency if he persuaded there is a grave threat to Malaysia's security. But following a meeting of Malaysia's Islamic royalty, the palace said the monarch was of the view that there is no need at this moment for the king to declare a state of emergency in the country or in any part of Malaysia. Such a declaration, rarely used in Malaysia, would have led to Parliament effectively being suspended, and Muhyiddin could have pushed through any law without a vote. Despite rejecting this request, the king praised the government's handling of the outbreak and urged lawmakers to stop politicking that could destabilize the country, according to the palace statement.
Myanmar civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi cast her ballot ahead of Election Day next week, with hundreds of thousands of elderly voters across the country expected to follow suit to reduce the risk of coronavirus. Wearing a face mask, rubber gloves, and her trademark flowers in her hair, Suu Kyi was one of the first in the country to vote in the capital, Naypyidaw. The 75-year-old's National League for Democracy, or NLD, is widely expected to be returned to power in the November 8 polls, only the second election since the Southeast Asian nation emerged from outright military rule. Thousands of polling stations across Yangon and other areas badly hit by the pandemic opened in advance to allow voters over the age of 60 to cast their ballots in a bid to protect them from coronavirus. Suu Kyi has placed herself front and center of the nation's efforts to combat the pandemic, giving near-daily addresses to implore citizens to follow lockdown measures. Experts also said her decision to ignore calls for the vote to be postponed is a gamble. With many campaign events canceled, her visibility has given the NLD an advantage. But Watchdog International Crisis Group said there could be serious public health ramifications once the voting is over. The Rohingya crisis, where hundreds of thousands of people fled across the border into squalid refugee camps to escape military-backed violence, might have shattered Suu Kyi's reputation in the West, but she still remains a hero for many at home. Her defense of the nation against genocide charges at the UN's top court last December consolidated support, particularly among the dominant ethnic Bamar.
China's top diplomat was in Cambodia on a visit both countries hope will boost relations at a time of increased tensions with the United States. Foreign Minister Wang Yi also visited Malaysia, Laos, and Thailand on a regional charm offensive, signed a trade deal that will allow Cambodia to export 340 mostly agricultural products without tariffs. Beijing has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in Cambodia as part of its global Belt and Road Initiative, but new bridges and roads have been offset by what locals see as Chinese appropriation of local assets and resources, such as in Sihanoukville. The coastal resort city boasts hundreds of Chinese-built and owned casinos and hotels, some only half finished, and most now deserted as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, leaving thousands of locals out of work. Bilateral trade between China and Cambodia was worth $8 billion in 2019, but this deal should push the exports up to $10 billion by 2023. Commerce Ministry spokesman Shang Thai told AFP. It could also offset losses caused by the European Union reimposing customs duties on Cambodian exports in August, said Hun Sen's spokesman Eng Sopalit.
And tarmac meals have become an unlikely hit for coronavirus battered Singapore Airlines, with hundreds of passengers paying the equivalent of a budget ticket just to dine inside grounded A380 jumbos. For a hefty sum of $470, people with a hankering for airline food can have a meal of an A380, the world's biggest passenger jet. Let's listen in.
The food is pretty amazing. it's better than the one they served during the flight.
In smooth sailing, it's a good experience touring the cabins. Just started the meal, the satay was just served to us. It was delicious and really feels to be like on a long haul flight, having the first meal service. Of course, the feeling of actually flying will be better because there's the excitement of going to a new destination, to explore new destination. And even though we can't do it now due to COVID, this is a good substitute for now to recreate the feels of being a long haul flight.
And this is the first time bringing the kid out, especially with an infant. So I guess it's the best, I'll say, a training ground for future travel. Because it's like flying, in the air with two kids. When they're going to be cranky, it's going to be hard to manage. So at least right now, it's still manageable. It's not in the air; it's just within the plane, and it's should be a lot better.
With the aviation industry in deep crisis due to the pandemic, airlines have turned to alternative ways to raise cash, from offering flights to nowhere to tours of aircraft. And Singapore Airlines, which has cut thousands of jobs and grounded nearly all its planes this year, decided to try another route. Offer travel-starved customers the opportunity to dine on one of two 380s turned into pop-up restaurants. And the chance to eat plain food proved surprisingly popular. All 900 seats for lunch on October 24 and 25 sold out within half an hour of bookings and opening on Monday. Citing overwhelming demand, the carrier announced the restaurants would be open for an additional 2 days. Lunch and dinner are now being offered on all 4 dates. And the most expensive option is a 4-course meal in a first-class suite, while the cheapest cost 53 Singaporean dollars and consists of a 3-course meal in economy class. About half the seats will be left empty on the double-decker jets parked at Changi Airport, in keeping with social distancing guidelines. And for those seeking to bring the in-flight experience into their living rooms, Singapore Airlines is also offering home deliveries of plain meals. But the airline has ditched plans for flights to nowhere, short journeys starting and ending at the same airport, following an outcry over the potential environmental impact.
Arnie Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net 25.
I don't care how far.
5 to 6 p.m. Open for business, from vision to action.
Hi, I'm Mia Pangyarihan at samahan niyo kami dito sa Tagisan ng Galing Part 2. Who will win the bout and who will get out? Abangan niyo yan dito lang sa Part 2 ng Tagisan ng Galing dito sa Net 25.
Welcome back in ASEAN in Focus. Doctors at Malaysian hospital are using a special chamber to do virus tests, allowing staff to safely collect COVID-19 swabs without being in the same airspace as their subjects.
This thing is airtight, vacuum, and it's positive pressure. Positive pressure means the air inside is pushing outwards. So in this case, the virus will not enter whenever the doctor comes out or comes into the booth. Safety of our team, our summer medical staff team, is our most priority. So we want them to help us to do the test. At the same time, we need to protect their safety. If our own staff don't feel reassured, they don't feel safe, they will not do it. At the same time, I, as their supervisor, I need to make sure that they feel comfortable whenever they do this test. So because of that, we created this idea. We have this idea to protect our staff from all possible danger and all that things.
Airtight and air-conditioned, the booth at the Sunway Medical Center in the city of Subang Jaya can fit a single tester behind an acrylic screen, reaching people via a pair of sealed latex gloves. During a test, doctors must insert a long plastic swab down a person's nose and mouth in order to collect samples that can determine if someone has caught the COVID-19 virus or not. Even behind layers of protective clothing and equipment, there is always the risk of infection, as medical staff must often attend to hundreds or even thousands of people a day. The hospital has been running a single booth in its virus screening tent since the end of May, with a second booth due to be installed soon. Malaysia is going through a relatively moderate outbreak of the COVID-19 virus, though a sudden spike of disease has pushed infections past 26,000 cases. Some 229 people in the Southeast Asian nation have so far died from the virus.
In other news, age almost 90, Vietnamese artist Mong Bish is a pioneer who has inspired generations of women artists in Vietnam, and she has won plaudits overseas and has a watercolor in the British Museum's collection. But for years, she has been overlooked in her home country and has had to wait until this month for her first solo exhibition. Take a look.
Khi mà tôi vẽ tranh này thì tôi cảm thấy nó rất là hạnh phúc, và tôi coi như là cuộc sống thì phải ăn, bởi vì người ta nói ăn để mà sống, thì tôi cũng thế. Vẽ tranh cũng như thể là khi mà tôi được ăn. Tôi vẽ những cái mà rất là trong cuộc sống nó rất là đơn giản, nó rất là bình thường thôi, nhưng mà cái cảm xúc của mình đặt vào một cách hết sức là chân thật và yêu mến nó thực, thì bất kỳ một cái gì tôi nghĩ nó cũng thành tranh.
Born in 1931 during the French colonial era, Bish spent decades caring for her husband, a violinist and independence fighter, who was wounded fighting French forces in Laos. They lived in desperate poverty while she raised their 2 children. Needing to earn a living, in 1956, she enrolled in one of the first classes of the newly opened Vietnam College of Art in Hanoi. And then she took a job drawing propaganda cartoons for a newspaper. But she never stopped sketching what she saw on the streets: a poor old woman curled up on the floor and a mother breastfeeding a baby, a drawing considered so scandalous it was initially removed from an exhibition in 1960. Despite everything she had to deal with, her pioneer spirit shone through and she persevered with her work, according to Nora Taylor, professor of South and Southeast Asian art history at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, her watercolor portrait of an elderly woman seated on the floor won first prize in 1993 at the Vietnam Fine Arts Association annual exhibition, but fame did not follow. The lack of recognition is due to a kind of erasure of women's contributions in Vietnam's art history, according to Taylor, as happened across much of the world. But that is finally changing, and there is growing acknowledgement that Bish's life and her paintings are testimony to what many went through in the 20th century Vietnam.
Meanwhile, in Singapore, cyclists and pedestrians stopped to pose with a giant rampaging Tyrannosaurus Rex along a new cycling and jogging track in Singapore. Over 20 models from 9 different prehistoric species are installed along the kilometer-long path.
That's all. Get ready. Okay, good.
It's very fun. Yeah, because my kids like dinosaurs, like most of the kids, and he know a lot of the species. So while he walks along, he will try to name all the different type of dinosaurs. Yeah.
And that's a wrap. Thank you, Christelle, for joining us today. How is the situation in Thailand right now? Are there still rallies, protests?
Yes, Alba will check the updates if they still plan to have a rally. But last night, yes, they have a rally last night in different areas around Bangkok.
All right, we'll wait for your updates. We follow this developing story out of there in Bangkok. Thank you, Christelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alma, and have a happy weekend. And just before I go, I'd like to greet the Executive Minister of Iglesia ni Cristo, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, a happy and blessed birthday po. And that's all the news around the ASEAN region. I am Crystal Mapa from EBC Thailand Bureau to live in interesting times.
Happy birthday po, Brother Eduardo Manalo. We love you po. And that's the news here in ASEAN region. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you back next week. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.